All right, here we are. Welcome back to Book Wave, the book club podcast. Joined today by Pat and Will. And if you're new around here, you can join us at www.bookwave.club. Leave a comment or a question or a comment down below on YouTube. And today we're looking at the book of Numbers from the Bible, working through the Old Testament. And my question to you has to do with Moses being the leader of the Israelites at the time of Numbers. How much do you think he was affected by the corruption of power?
I think that we'll get more answers in the next book about that, right? Because in the fifth book, in what is it, Deuteronomy? Is that next?
Yes.
Yeah, in Deuteronomy, that's like the end of Moses' entire story, right?
Yeah, he dies in the last line of that one.
Sorry, guys, spoilers, spoiler alert. He does die. I think that will help me round out my response to that. But I think that obviously he had a lot of power, and like from what I see him doing, he seems to be doing a good job, but I'm looking at it through the lens of, well, assuming God's real, this all makes sense. But if we go back to that other hypothesis where maybe God isn't real, then yeah, absolutely, the guy's insane. Like, he's pathologically manipulating an entire society and ethnic group and telling them how to live their life, and he's created an entire religion to orchestrate his master plan. And that's there's no other way to describe it. That's absolute corruption. But
in the end, though, his master plan worked. His master plan did work.
Exactly. You got to ask your question. Is it even corruption at that point just because he has control? And when you look at the long term, obviously they did make it, and they did get to their destination. I don't know how well it's played out. I need to do a lot more reading to answer that. But like, again, maybe they omitted all the stories that would have elucidated the point that he was completely corrupt. Like, maybe they left out the chapters on where Moses had a harem of women and, beat up men. But I like, maybe they left out the chapter on Moses' Gestapo. But me personally, going through and what I've read, I would say that this is a man who had foresight and a really big plan, and he did everything in his power to execute it. And then there's some miracles that happen that leave me with serious hangups about the entire concept. Like, being stuck in the desert or in the wilderness for 40 years in a journey that, if you do a mile a day, takes you 9 months, is hard to rectify unless God sentenced them to die and have their next generation get what he promised them. Like, that's the only way it really makes sense to take 40 years to do a 9-month march.
Well, there's also a war going on, too. Fighting all the Canaanites and the Kezites.
And not to mention, there's like over 500,000 Israelites following Moses. Like, I think there's like, last time we counted was like 600,000 something.
Yeah, and that's just the fighting men.
Yeah.
Fighting men, that's it.
Like, if you assume there's 3 people for every 1 man, then there's like 2.5 million people. And like, I guess if you look at it as saying, like, there's this giant population here, and inside of this population there are amenities for food and water and religion and housing, and none of it's going to stay here, and it's going to go over here, and we're going to do it in a way that every time we move a little bit we sacrifice none of our livelihood. Then I guess, yeah, that would take 40 years. But what a weird way to migrate, like, load everything up, don't set up the tabernacle, and just go, like, spears first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that also reminds me of another analogy that we've pulled in a really good comparison of the Book of Numbers in The Art of War. And something Isaac Asimov talks about is the way that they set up their camps from Sinai to Israel or Canaan, whatever, is almost identical to the way the Egyptians set up their war camps when they were fighting pretty much the same people. So that's pretty interesting.
It's kind of like a parallel.
Yeah.
Well, you can imagine that they all probably, like, these were the slaves of Egypt. So,
Yeah. So they
when
they might as well use the tools that they had. They knew how the Egyptians traveled when they went to war. They were going to war, so pick up the
don't
tools.
reinvent the wheel.
Exactly.
And yeah, you see a lot of detail, and I guess that explains all of it then, is that it's coming from Egypt. All of this, instead of it being God-given, it's just like common sense that you would take the effective military stratagem from the people that enslaved your race. Like, obviously, it worked for them. But it is cool because there's this detailing in this really old text of how to lay out the camp and what all the different alarm sounds are, and a lot of strategies. And it was a lot more intelligent and war related than I was expecting it to be.
It also talks about all the non-Israelite slaves that they kept with them on the way there too. So that wasn't counted in the fighting men above the age of 20. So the estimates by that scale are around 2 to 5 million people traveling up north. But there's a lot of people, like a lot of biblical scholars, that question the translation when they use like the word epas or something like that means like 100 people instead of another word that means 10 that's like kind of similar, just like represent them in bands of people. The number is a lot smaller and a lot more feasible to some people. So they're just like, that might be a mistranslation of how many people they were actually carrying with them. And it might
Right.
it sounds pretty unrealistic to have 5 million people traveling from Sinai to Canaan. And
Yeah.
taking 40 years, how many bulls are they going to have to sacrifice for that?
Oh, exactly.
Too many.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Too many. Then again, language can be manipulative.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah, and this is like, and that's one of the things, like I was saying before we started, I want to read other texts related to this migration
Mhm.
and war. Like, I clearly have no idea what the big picture even looks like, but just reading like the fourth book and the establishment of the lots and the inheritance for the tribes, and the 2.5 that stayed on the West Bank and the 9.5 that went across, like, holy shit, I have context on a war that I've watched on the news for the entirety of my life.
Yeah, that kind of works into another point that I made just before we started recording, that whenever I look up the book of Numbers or something in the Old Testament, watch a video about it, without fail it mentions Jesus by the end of it. So anything you want to say about that, Will?
What are you trying to do? Like, just sell me on rage? I think it's stupid and ignorant and arrogant and conceited and a whole bunch of other adjectives that the Christian religion would just throw a blanket over the entire Old Testament, bind it up right beside their book, and pretend that any of it has anything to do with anything that's going on in their new little light version of religion. And and it's obnoxious and it's unfair that they would teach generations of children something so close to the truth and never point you in the direction of any information, and never like, they've been pulling the wool over billions of people for hundreds of years, and it's insane. And it always is. That's what Nietzsche says, right? Like, insanity in an individual is rare, insanity in a nation, a town, a group, a
Yeah,
tribe, a religion is the rule.
absolutely.
But it's like, really, God? Like, really?
Yeah, I honestly don't know where they got that from, and plus, it's too early to mention the life of Jesus Christ at this point. We haven't even
Where are
reached the
we
New
at?
Testament.
Like, aren't we at like 1300 BC right now?
I think a little
Between
bit.
1400 and 1200 BC. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really
Like,
strange.
what the heck?
Really
Another,
strange.
we're
Oh,
talking about translations too. Another weird thing, the name Joshua is basically translates to Jesus. So lots of people think that when they're talking about Joshua in the Old Testament, that's a nod to Jesus of Nazareth in the New Testament. Because, like, whenever whenever a word ends in like a vowel, they always end it with another S. With like an S and a vowel, they always put another S on the end of it. So the Greek and Hebrew languages really aren't compatible. Like the V's and the J's, the
Yeah,
W's, the U's.
and that's the thing. It's like I'm four books deep into the Old Testament, and I'm thinking to myself, this isn't the right book to be reading the Old Testament from, and this isn't the right language to be reading the Old Testament from. And then on the other hand, I have Nietzsche, who's being translated from what, German, and saying, stop translating people. You can't understand what a person is saying and thinking if you translate their language and don't communicate with them in their mother tongue. The tempo's lost, the pacing's lost, and it becomes a completely different conversation. And it's like I am like 18 stages removed from the truth on the Old Testament, it feels like. And I just feel so ignorant. But it's nice because it's like I have a whole list of things that I can do to address that ignorance.
Just like the more we learn about the inconsistencies, the more we can actually question it. Like one thing that I've gotten from reading Nietzsche was like I've always had a problem with Christianity, but Nietzsche's like, this is why you have a problem with Christianity. I'm like, oh, yeah, I agree with that. Some parts I get a little snagged on, but, you know, the more you read about one particular topic, the more you're able to get a grip of what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
And I guess another thing that I often wonder whenever I read the Bible is, are they trying to, I don't know, provide an analogy or a metaphor? I mean, there's plenty of metaphors in the New Testament from what I've heard, but are there any here in the Book of Numbers? Did any of you find any metaphors or analogies that make sense?
That's a really good point to bring up, Pat, because like that's what we thought, right? When we jumped into the Bible, was like, oh, it's the Bible, it's so important. There's metaphors and analogies and the rules to live life. And it's like reading the book of Numbers felt reading all of these books felt a lot like reading the Iliad, where it's this huge reportage of information and cities and names and locations. And it just seems more like reading documentation about history in some small context than, happy go lucky. If you're feeling distraught about your career choices, turn to Matthew 6:14, right? Which is literally what it says in the front of those little New Testaments. Like there's an index of emotions. It's like, if you feel sad, listen to John. But like I don't think I'd point anyone to anything that I've read in the first four books unless it was to laugh, because there's some really funny, interesting stuff that I've read in this book that it's enlightening. It's insightful to have read it because it's like, oh, wow, I had no idea and all my preconceived notions of this book are wrong. But like,
Or in the Book of Proverbs, which comes up later.
yeah, we'll get to that stuff eventually. But as far as Numbers is concerned, there was one really big thing that stuck out to me aside from the Art of War parallel, and that was the abortion ritual. Do you remember that one?
I don't
Yeah,
recall.
somewhat.
So I remember all of it because I read this thing, and as you may or may not know, I dabble with hypnosis, And I like the idea of belief and how our beliefs can drive us to do certain things, and how when you have a big group of people believing something that may or may not be true, that turns into a very powerful mentality. And if that group goes aggressive, so it's even worse. But just at a society level, right? Like in the town, if someone believes that you're cheating on your husband, you're gonna have a really hard life, especially 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And so this ritual was that if a husband suspected his wife was cheating on him, he would bring her to the priest, who would bring her before God.
I remember.
And
this.
the priest would take a wooden vessel, and he would fill it with holy water and dust from the ground. And she would take this potion. This spell would be cast with the help of God, that if she was cheating, she would die on the spot, and so would the guy she was sleeping with. But if she wasn't cheating on her husband, she would be absolved of her guilt. He would have to remove all of the doubt from his mind, and the entire community is witnessing this. So all of his friends are seeing him calling her out, and now they have to agree that there's no actual reason for her to be called out. All of her friends are seeing her be absolved of her guilt, so she's instantly back in all of the circles and accepted again right away. No drama, no beef. It's over, because to say otherwise would be to speak against God. If she doesn't die, she's good. And I don't know if you've ever drank a glass of water with dirt in it, but I have. And I did not die. And miracle aside, if you give someone a glass of water with some dirt in it, they're not going to die. Like, your dirt's got to be really messed up for them to die. And so when you look at this like ritual, which is literally what it is, it's this ritual, this giant group ritual. It's doing like two things. It's telling the husband to stop being a dick, and it's telling the community to stop being a dick, and it's getting the couple back. It's the third thing, getting the couple back together, because we're in the desert for 40 years, we're going to war, and you need to have more babies.
Yeah, get over it. Whatever. She cheated on you. She's just trying to make more kids.
And maybe that's my hyper intense interpretation of something that wasn't actively used and was thrown into the King James version because of translation. But like, taking it for what it is, super powerful mind control.
Yeah.
Love it.
Who
Totally
knows?
support it.
Who really knows what should or shouldn't be in the Old Testament or the Torah, though? Because like, when you read something like the Iliad, you're like, well, maybe something like that was originally in the Bible, like, and Achilles stabbed Hector through the heart with a spear, and then, Menelaus slew the son of whoever. Like, it doesn't go into detail about any of the warfare, but it's definitely there.
I feel like it might go into detail later. Like,
Maybe.
I'm not sure, but like, I was looking up Gideon, and I know that he's a warrior, and he goes to war in one of the books down the road, just because I keep hearing this name Gideon, and I was like, where did it come from? And of course, it came from the Old Testament, but like, everybody's using that name.
Yeah.
It was the Minority Report. Minority Report in the Flash.
Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, there you go.
That's my favorite part. Screw metaphors. There's so many names that have been used for 3,000 years that I didn't know were used for 3,000 years. Like, holy cow.
Yeah.
And some that are no longer used anymore.
We should bring them back.
Yes.
Yeah.
You should name your firstborn Akalagazir.
Balaam.
Stop giving all these fancy names, like Traveler. Or any kind of ridiculous name.
Stop trying to be unique.
X-Ashe 12. X-Ashe 12. Just one more thing on the editing of the Bible, and the incorporation of Jesus throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. It really reminds me of a Neil Gaiman quote. about the difference between writing and editing. Like when you're writing a story, your job is to make it to the ending, and when you're editing it, your job is to go back to the beginning and make it look like you knew everything that was going to happen at the end at the very start. So that's what I think about when I read the Bible. Like, okay, they're going back through the Old Testament, taking out all the good stuff that they can match with the stuff that they wrote about Jesus. And that's what got left
But that's
in.
why, like, so that's where I have the big issue with, like, the version of the Old Testament we're reading. Like, I feel like I need to learn Hebrew and then read the Old Testament because, like, like I'm not a conspiracist, and you don't need to be. Like, you look at the King James version, and the words are different, and like there is a tenet in Judaism that says Mosaic testimony, and that the Torah is the word of Moses from the word of God. And if the version of the Old Testament I'm reading is different from the version they swear is the truth, what's the point?
Yeah. But
like, how are you going to rewrite something that has an entire civilization of people saying, no, 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 we have it in our heads and on paper, the same story. We tell it to every single one of us, and we all know it, and we all have the same story. And you're just going to be like, no, 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 no. We're just going to call Azazel a scapegoat. We don't need to call him Yahweh or Jehovah. Like, screw you guys. What?
Well, I guess that's how the Holy Bible in general lasts for a long time. Because there's so many interpretations of it that anybody can look at it and reprint their version of it and tell it to everybody else from their own perspective. I mean, sometime last year I read a book about how novels last for a long time by looking at their own language, their own writing style, and then getting it out published. Even not just modern literature, but just, the Bible in general, or the Torah, or the 92 Theses by Martin Luther.
Oh, the 95 Theses?
95 Theses.
The birth of Protestantism.
Yeah. Like, there's many ways to look at that because it's so complex.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, I mean, thank God that people have been appropriating the text for 3,000 years to keep it prevalent, but I sure wish they didn't.
Yeah, I have the same problem with Star Wars after all. Like, why'd they have to make the sequels?
Exactly. Like, have you distilled your truth into one text? Okay, good. Let's just save that, hold on to it, and we'll let people read it.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it's like, so people are turning to this book for answers, and I'm coming out of it with questions, and I'm coming out of it wondering if I can even get the answers to the questions I might one day want to ask without knowing Latin or Greek or Hebrew. Like, that's just ridiculous. And then you have to look at the whole, like, maybe that's God's fault because we built the Tower of Babylon and he dispersed us and created all these languages.
Yeah.
By the way, where is that story? Which book?
Babylon?
Yeah.
Babel's in Genesis.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they just throw that right in after Noah. Before Noah?
No, it's right after Noah, because when Shem, Ham, and Japheth come off the ark, and Japheth goes north, Ham goes to Africa, and Shem goes to Canaan, becomes the Semites. They all separate because God made them. Hey, you're supposed to multiply upon the earth, not stay in this one city. Go, spread out, do your thing, your people. So then he made our languages confuse each other, so we had to separate. So
It's an interesting concept.
Like, what is that supposed to mean, really? Many cultures that don't understand each other can't live together. Is that the only moral of the story?
Well, no, I got the opposite. Is that without division of culture, who do you compete with to have more babies then?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, there's
Or
no game.
outcompete each other in terms of like economics or anything like that.
Hmm.
what was the first part of your sentence there, Pat?
Who can outcompete anybody if it's
Well,
not
it's just like,
diverse?
yeah, exactly. Like without diversity, like why would you compete? If everybody was happy and content, what would be the point? Um,
Well, I think everybody can still be happy. It's just that many people have their own version of just building something or innovating something, while another culture thinks that their version is better. Why don't we see what the masses think of ours?
Hmm. Well, every culture by default is going to make the argument that their culture is better than the rest of them.
are
'Cause
they?
I would think so.
Would you?
Well, maybe not. There's plenty of examples about like whiteys joining the Native Americans during that whole migration, to call it a nice word.
Yeah, I think it's weird that because yeah, I think I would jump on the idea to say that, pride in one's culture, ethnicity, nation, whatever is a given, but a lot of people, at least that I see getting highlighted lately, are not expressing that sort of national pride. And I think nationalism and national pride and all of these things have a bit of a taboo on them now. And like,
Oh yeah.
it feels like, especially in Canada, right? Like we're heading towards a cultural melting pot where,
What is our motto here in Canada? Diversity is our strength.
is it?
There is no culture.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what is a Canadian? Well, a Canadian could be anybody that lives on Earth at this point. And
Yeah.
how do you recognize a Canadian? And how do you feel a sense of brothership with a fellow Canadian without having a definition of what a Canadian is? Like, so now I have to have a Canadian flag, and that's what we do. If we want to go to Mexico, we put Canadian flags all over our shit because we know that they hate you Americans, and there's no way we're gonna get confused as an American because we're white and we're going down to Mexico, or those of us that are white are going down to Mexico, and we're throwing on a Canadian flag to make sure that distinctly everywhere in the world, people like Canadians more than Americans. That's the stereotype, and the way we distinguish ourselves is just with that symbol. And is that enough?
I think
Because we're
I think they're just gonna ask you what your purpose is
like,
being here in Mexico.
especially like, no, like beyond that, Pat, get with me. Up here, way up here. Um, like we're trying to get rid of God in every single institution we have in Canada right now. We're trying to get rid of him in the national anthem. We're trying to get rid of him in schools. We're trying to get rid of him anywhere else that he appears because we have freedom of religion and we don't want to neglect other people's religions
Yeah.
by saying the Lord's Prayer in school. And I think that makes sense. But if you strip a nation of a collective spirituality and a collective ethnicity, and all you give them is the symbol that is a flag, hope to fuck that doesn't change.
Yeah.
If they try to change the Canadian flag, that will make me ask different questions.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know what song to sing in the crowds to represent my
Yeah.
nation now because the words are changing. So like, how do I know? Because and so maybe that is why we got to where we are now, to get to a place where we're going, so that we can be able to look at A and B and see if there's a C.
Yeah, that's a good point when you bring up just the fear of being stripped of your own spirituality, but no matter where that comes from, no matter what
Yeah.
religion that might be, it is scary. And I don't think a lot of people nowadays think about just the individual as a whole,
Yeah.
and why they focus on that kind of spirituality in general. And some of them don't even spout their own beliefs on others. They just believe it and they just go about their day.
Yeah, in
And
Canada,
that's the biggest fear too. And I think Nietzsche brings that up when he talks
oh,
about free spirit, the chapter on free spirit.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and so just to go even further down this rabbit hole, so we don't talk about religion, we don't talk
Yeah.
about
You know,
politics.
you know why we don't talk about religion, especially in Canada? I don't know how it is in the United States, but we actually have a form of religious segregation in this country when it comes to education. We have
Yeah,
the regular school board, the public schools, and we have the Catholic school board. So, if you're
and
Catholic, you send
secretly,
your kids to Catholic school.
so it's worse than that. So like my neighbor across the street has a sign in her front lawn because there's no class graduations this year that says
Right.
home of a 2020 uh, Protestant separate school. I won't say the name of the school, but Protestant separate school graduate. So we've got the Protestant separate schools, we've got the Catholic schools, and then if you go into a big city, there are Islamic schools, there are
Oh
Jewish
yeah.
schools, there are like heavily funded private sector schools. But if you're just a regular human being born into this nation by someone that doesn't have a religion, then you have the choice. You can go to normal people's school or you can go to Catholic school. Like anybody can sign up and go to Catholic school in this country. And
Yeah, but it's just the taboo that's there. Like when you're raised up in a public school, they teach you that, religion isn't really important. They don't touch the
Well,
stuff.
here's what I was grown up with. I was grown up in a Christian environment, and then I left by the time reached the age of reason. By age of reason, that was like, I don't know, 14 or 15.
I haven't hit that age yet, personally. We're hoping.
And and we do have something like that here in the States. We do have Catholic churches, Catholic schools, and we even have homeschool groups that are Christian or Protestant or Methodist or Lutheran. Lutheran was what I was brought up into, and although unfortunately we didn't have beer, very unfortunate. And so we pretty much learned about Lutheranism and as well as the Bible, of course. But the thing is, and this is actually something that I've been thinking about recently, is that a lot of the people that I grew up with don't usually spout their beliefs, but they just simply say, God has a plan for me. I know he does have a plan for you, and I hope you do well. And let's play some Xbox. That kind of thing.
Yep.
And and right now, I don't know it's been a while since I've been in that environment, and I don't know what it's like today, but back then, you could even go to a public school and not carry this kind of education, especially when you meet somebody who's been a part of that education. The two of you can just simply go about your own lives, and you can be friends, you can have differences of opinion about that, and still maintain peace and order.
Yeah. I have some similar experiences. I think I mentioned this before, but I kind of have this weird dynamic where when I'm talking with you guys, I'm basically the token atheist, but whenever I'm talking to other people, I'm the guy that won't shut up about the Bible. So I've reached some kind of middle ground here that feels pretty weird. No one will accept me.
Well, we're all just, exploring together,
Yeah.
trying to figure it out.
But yeah, but like
Thank God for you
same
guys.
thing. When I ask my friends like something like, "Hey, do you believe in God?" They're like, "Eh, probably not the Christian God. Let's go play Xbox.
See, I don't really even bring up the question, like, unless someone comes out and tells me what their spirituality is, in which case I'll grill them. Like, I did that to extended family member last weekend. And, it's like, so why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? Why do you believe this? And, the answer usually comes back to, well, it's a good community. And it's not really about what they're about, but it's about the fact that I was in that community and the community was good and I stayed in that community. And I think that that's a pretty noble reason to stay in the community. But it becomes a problem if you ever actually do have some big questions and you want to look at the person who's giving you the answers and you find out that you don't really like what else is written in that book. But with a public school system and a Catholic school system that says, look, if you like religion, you can go to Catholic school, and if you don't talk about it, go to public school, it puts us in a situation where now we're not having these conversations. And we probably shouldn't have those conversations as children, but the thing is, the conversations are being forced on children, or just the religion's being forced on children. And what's happening is we have generation upon generation coming up, ignorantly thrown into one of a million options, and they could be the second coming if they hadn't have been brainwashed. That's a fun joke. But it's like I'm of the mind that Socrates was, that you shouldn't be educating children until they're like 25. Like, train their bodies and secretly get in with games a whole bunch of different information that they'll hopefully consume, but don't force them to do anything they're not willing to do. And to throw religion into the mix? Like, are you kidding me?
It's like almost that religion needs a rebranding. Like, it shouldn't be preaching that they have the capital T truth and the end all be all of the universe. It should be advertising itself just as that, a great club for people, a wonderful community to join and, maybe fix your life.
Yeah, I don't think that would be good enough. That sounds like veiled and just still sounds like a trap. Like, oh yeah, come have fun. We eat food together.
I think that the best way to come across any kind of religion or any kind of community or just any kind of book in general, and this is what Jordan Peterson mentioned on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is you have to pick out something that works in real life, in practice, whatever that might be, whether it's a belief, a theme, or a practice, and test it and see if it works. Even test your own beliefs to it. And if it doesn't work, put it back in the book and look for something else to look at. I think that's something that we should do within both religious education and general education. Instead of just segregating them, they have to be open and let the public look at each one and just pick something, anything, and see if that works.
Like, I want a superstructure that transcends borders, but like maybe doesn't even. Like, I don't know if I want a nationalist superstructure in every country or a global superstructure.
Well, they at least have to be compatible, right? To a certain extent.
I haven't fleshed it out in any degree. You just have the borders of something. Let me put a drop of milk into it. One egg, at least. So, there's two options. There's the Humans Club, which is for Earth and people that live on it, or there's the Nationals Club, which is like the Canadians Club or the United States Club. And you'd be able to have a chapter in every town, and you'd go in, and it would be people that want to have a conversation with you like you're an equal. And you don't have to have a religion, and you don't have to have a political preference. And you can go in and discuss with people their religion and their political preferences in a safe space. And there's a membership fee, or maybe there's some sort of fundraising like schedule for the year, and this club allows you to get volunteer experience and help in the community, and lead to engaging conversations about politics and religion. And I don't know if it would be better if you had it as a Canadians club or as a humans club, because I feel like the humans club would be a bit too big and daunting of a task, and I feel like the Canadians club would be a bit too much nationalism for me to be comfortable talking about supporting. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Like that hour after the mass is over where you're talking to the old people who have opinions about their opinions and your opinions, that is the most beneficial part of the experience. Or the 20 minutes before your karate class where your instructor actually is a human being, not a 10th Dan black belt who's beating the crap out of you, and he's telling you that he really enjoys working on his motorcycle, and all of a sudden he has this second dimension to him, and you think, oh, my mentor likes motorcycles, and now you're interested in motorcycles, and it changes your entire life forever. Like, that's the kind of conversation I want people to be able to go and have conversations about.
Feels like that used to be like school, universities.
Yeah.
What happened?
I'll tell you exactly what happened. We created a system wherein there were so many moving parts that the moving parts sought to perpetuate the system. And the system wasn't perpetuating the system, the parts were. And all of a sudden the parts said, look, if we give them tests and notes to take for tests, then we can just keep fucking going for 150 years. And it stopped being about making good art and creating good business.
Sounds like the will to power at work.
Yeah. More on the Nietzsche podcast.
Yeah. Might have to do a couple of those.
Yeah. What a overwhelming amount of information.
It kind of reminds me of, the Book of Numbers. It also reminds me of, his name is on the top of my head, but I can't say it. Who wrote the 48 Laws of Power? Who wrote that?
Oh gosh, that's a skill testing question.
I know his last name is Green, but I don't know what his first name is. I don't want to say Robert Greene.
Robert Greene.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just brings back some readings from that book and how it could be used for, a higher purpose, or it could just be used to learn about what your enemies are thinking. Just thought that was kind of odd, bringing that up.
I haven't read the 48 Laws of Power. I'll have to put it on my reading list. I'm not sure if you were comparing 48 Laws of Power to Nietzsche or to Book of Numbers. I got lost.
The Book of Numbers. Just the different laws that God and Moses put up and everything like that.
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking lately, is because of there is a clearly defined structure of operation for this group of individuals, right down to their calendars and these little notes where they're like, oh, and you're going to do this for the rest of your life. As a group of humans, you will all observe this day, and all of you will know that this day is sacred, and you can all relate to each other because you will all be doing these things, and that's how you'll know that you're brothers. And it's we don't have that in a free religion state.
Like Sun Tzu says, unite all your soldiers under the same spirit.
Yeah.
Wow, that's not happening right now.
There's got to be some kind of, international spirit that we can point to. Some kind of spirit or spiritual force that can unite humanity.
Humanism.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that is inarguably on Earth, probably. There's a lot of us. And if we all started firing at the same time, we could probably do some really cool stuff again. I'd like to see some new pyramids in the next 1,000 years. It's been a while since we built one of those as a race. Maybe we could do it with all these cool tools we've built instead of with a bunch of humans. But
Yeah.
instead, we've got a bunch of humans using a bunch of tools to make a bunch of crappy parts to then get paid to make those parts, to buy those things that the parts are being used for, that will break down and then make more, and then hate making them and then hate buying them. And it's just this consumer-driven nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Elon Musk example. Like, we need another space race. We need another great human accomplishment. That's why he's trying to get to Mars.
Yeah, well, without competition, the human race seems to stagnate and try and feel like that free will is actually freedom of comfort.
Yeah, now you've got me thinking about Nietzsche again with that bow metaphor that he always brings up.
That's going to be like a 2 to 3 hour podcast.
It's-
I guarantee you it.
It's gonna be like 9 podcasts.
I love that he had the audacity to publish a book, first of all, and then to write a chapter that's literally 135 one-liners.
Yeah. It's
Like-
beautiful.
It's like, holy cow, the balls on that man.
Well, we'll save that for the next podcast here.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you all wanted to... Well, actually, I remember going back and listening to you and Matthew talk about the book of Exodus, and I know that at some point during that recording, Will, I think you sneezed, and then Matthew
sneezed.
brought...
I
Or you
sneezed.
sneezed, Scott. And then Matthew brought up the concept of God bless you. And I finally found out where that came from. It's in this book.
Right.
When
Numbers
who is it,
itself.
Balaam? Who is it? Balaam blesses Israel?
Yeah. We can talk about that Balaam guy too. Because he was basically a prophet for working for the bad guys. And there's this king of this Canaanite tribe named Balak. And he says, I need you to curse these Israelites because we're going to war with them. But every time he tried to curse the Israelites, Balaam ended up blessing all of the Israelites instead because he was unable to utter the curses. Yahweh wouldn't let him do it.
Yeah, I think it's weird. Almost as weird as you referring to him as Yahweh, because it is not Yahweh in the King James Version. That there's a prophet who is like prophesizing for the same God as all of these guys, and they don't know each other. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I follow their God. Sorry, I can't help you."
Yeah, that
Like,
doesn't
how
really
does-
make sense to me. He was
That-
bringing their God from like the rock that Abraham was sleeping at. He brought the God from that land all the way up unto the land of Canaan. And all of a sudden Balaam is saying, oh yeah, this is my God too. And yeah, he doesn't want me to curse the Israelites. Too bad for you, Balak. And he's got a
But
talking
you can try
donkey.
again. What?
And he's got a talking donkey.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird.
But like he tries, they build a lot of sacrificial spots and sacrifice a lot, and like what a waste of time. Like that poor Balak, mountain to mountain. Oh no, sorry, still follow their God. I don't know, it's the weirdest thing. Let's try again.
That's wonderful.
Every single time he's like grabbing a little bit of sacrificial meat. It's like really well seasoned and fresh. He's like, yeah, I don't know, man. Tomorrow night for sure. Do you have any wine? Oh. But yeah, like they got out. They made it to the land of Canaan. Their 40-year jaunt is just about concluded. They've won some wars. Won a lot of wars. They killed a lot of
Yeah.
people. They've taken a lot of slaves. They've taken a lot of
Acquired-
pastures.
Acquired a lot of wealth.
What I found interesting is that they call the outside of town where they keep their pastures the suburbs. Because in today's society, that's where we keep our cattle. That's where we keep people, is the suburbs. And they live in the suburbs and they consume
Notice the little Freudian slip in there.
raise. I just thought it was interesting to get that origin on that word. Like, oh, the pastures in the suburbs? Huh.
Yeah. There's another little thing about inheritance that it just briefly talks about that I wanted to go over. Women,
weird one, eh?
Women could inherit wealth from their fathers, but they were forbidden from marrying outside of their own tribe. So in a way, incest is mandatory because of money.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
but yeah.
when
Great.
When a god loves a planet and he wants it to be fruitful and multiply, a brother and a sister, or a brother and a cousin, or a brother and a mother share a special cuddle.
Yeah, there's another point too, though. When God is instructing them to be fruitful and multiply, and you see most of these rules are, in accordance with that. But the funniest thing is when they count the Israelites, after 40 years, it's actually about 2,000 people less than when they started out of Mount Sinai. So, what happened there? They all just die in war? It doesn't explain
not
that.
bad, man. That's a good rate. 2,000 over 40 years?
But I heard a lot of people on YouTube talk about how that number didn't increase was a sign that God was angry with the Israelites. And that was part of their punishment of staying in the desert for 40 years. Like, you can't multiply right now. You're not following my rules properly. And
it was just culling and a replacement with a new generation, essentially.
Yeah. And it all gets capped off when Moses hits that rock with a stick instead of talking to it. And God says, that's the final straw, guys. Moses isn't allowed in the promised land. You're not allowed in until he dies. So then it goes through the death of Aaron, the death of Miriam, the death of Moses is yet to come. But as we will see, Moses isn't allowed in because he hit the rock with his stick.
He got so aggravated.
Oh, he got cocky is what he did. That's probably one of the leading demonstrations of power corrupting him. But you have to believe in God for it to make sense.
Yeah, it's a weird one. And there was just one other little bit that I wanted to bring up. The brass serpent. You're asking for metaphors. I don't know if this counts as a metaphor, but it kind of comes close. That when people start getting bitten by snakes in the desert, Moses makes this brass, or this rod with two brass serpents on it. And as soon as they touch it, they get healed from the snake bite. And even today, like, our symbol of medicine is like the two coiling snakes around the rod. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the symbolism there. There was also a couple civil wars or a couple conflicts happening between the Israelites. Like near the beginning when it was Joshua and Caleb, I think. They head out with all the other spies and they come back. And like all of them say we should go to war. Or Caleb and Joshua say they should go to war and the other 10 say no, let's not. And that starts a big fight among themselves. So I remember God or somebody killing a bunch of Israelites in that confrontation.
Yeah, he swallowed them up, right? With the earth.
Yeah.
And then Aaron's son,
Yeah, that was in the last book. We were talking about that one. Aaron's children got swallowed up by the fire when they were offering unclean food.
No.
They were
I was
unclean?
gonna say Aaron's son speared one of the Israelites through and the woman he was sleeping with in another tribe.
Oh, right. Because
Yeah,
they
and
weren't
poured
supposed to mingle. They weren't supposed to mingle with people worshiping other gods. So, when they found out they were, that's no good. Time to die.
Yeah, and that started a plague, and the plague killed a bunch of people, and then Aaron's son speared the guy, and God stopped the plague then and awarded him the high priestship, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a lot of infighting, a lot of murmuring against God and murmuring against Moses that made Moses and God smite the people, and it was a whole drama.
Yeah. And just one more thing on the Moses having a corruption of power. Did you catch the part where his sister accuses him of some misdeed after sleeping with an Ethiopian woman? And then Moses says, "You know what? I don't care." And then she gets leprosy and has to live outside the camp for a week.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
what was
I
that
do
all about?
remember that.
Really,
Oh man, if you were gonna grill me on that, I would have reread it for context. But I feel like what happened was so assume God's fake. Moses is running a cult, and his brother's wife was doing something she shouldn't have been doing. For example, work on a Sunday, right? Foraging in the woods, gets a bit of poison ivy, rolls into camp, obviously has evidence of working on a Sunday, punishable by death. All
Yeah.
Moses has to do is say that she's done something wrong, and God has smitten her with leprosy, or smote her with leprosy. Sorry, he's not in love with her. Um, smote her with leprosy, kick her out of the camp for a week, and just turn it into this big ordeal. And now she's not getting sent to death for having picking berries, the wrong berries, on a Sunday, for example.
Yeah, but my problem with that is it doesn't bring into question whether or not Moses was right or wrong in sleeping with the Ethiopian woman. The punishment towards Miriam is because she questioned Moses and his authority. And then, if you don't believe in God, that looks a lot like Moses saying, "Get the hell out of my face for a week," and sending her off to the lepers. Don't question my authority and my judgment. I do what I want. Only I can talk to God, kind of thing. You guys have no right.
Yeah,
I am the vessel of the authority here. Not the authority itself, because that would be too conceited. It wouldn't have worked
yeah,
as well if you just said, "You need to listen to my rules and we'll get along just fine, trust me." He needed to create that symbol.
yeah. Well, it creates that space between him and what he wants, and it's like, oh, I don't want this. Like, I'm not a bad person. This is just the plan, and we have to do the plan. Yeah,
Hmm.
he could have been a pathological liar and a fucking maniac.
Well, the question for me really comes down to, did Moses himself believe the things he was saying? And there's plenty of answers for that we'll never know the right one.
Hmm.
But, Nietzsche has ideas on that too, so.
I mean, it just kind of goes back to that parallel with the king of Egypt, right before
Mm,
Moses and the Israelites left. There's some influence from that.
Yeah. Like, I'd really like to just learn Hebrew and read one of the more older versions and then formulate my opinions.
yeah, maybe read a couple pages out of a Jewish study Bible at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like there's 100 different things I should be reading to give myself more context on all this stuff, which sucks. Like, I thought this book was supposed to have answers.
Oh, jeez.
But
Probably
yeah,
wrap
like,
it. We should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, I'm pretty much running out of stuff to talk about now. I don't know if that brings to light anything from the Book of Numbers for you, but I hope you enjoyed our conversation, everybody.
And let us know what you think.
Yeah. Drop a comment down
Feel free
below.
to draft a big rambling rant explaining and needling
Yes.
all of our arguments because we'd really like that.
Yeah. And if you really want to, if you really want to have a long conversation, then just hit us up. Maybe we'll work something out, because I'm pretty ignorant on this topic. All I know is I know nothing. But until next time, may the force be with you.
Bye.